Okay, so we're here fresh off the panel with Phil Checkley. Phil, I don't think you've been on the podcast before, so it's maybe worth introducing yourself.
Hi, Phil Checkley. I'm Commercial Affairs Lead for Tata Steel UK, and that includes responsibility for CBAM in terms of our compliance, but also helping the organisation understand the implications for the business and our customers.
And as I just said, you've actually come straight off a panel on CBAM. You chaired that panel. On the panel, there was Frank Ascough as well, who was from UK Steel. We actually chatted to him about CBAM last year. But for those who don't know, could you, in the simplest of terms, if possible, explain what CBAM is and why is it important for the industry?
Of course. So, as an industry in the UK, we're exposed to carbon costs. Those costs affect our competitiveness, certainly relative to imported product that don't bear those costs. CBAM is a mechanism that will apply a tariff to those imports to level that playing field as far as carbon cost is concerned. So once UK CBAM is implemented, we should see at least the competitive intensity related to the carbon cost become more equal, certainly in the UK market.
And I think I'm right in saying that the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, that's what CBAM stands for, isn't it?
Yeah.
Is due to come in place in 2027?
1st of January 2027, yeah.
So that's not really that long away. What's happened in the past year, and are we kind of on track for that?
Well, on the panel we had Callum Boyd from Treasury, and he's confirmed that they're certainly working and expect to hit the 1st of January 2027. I guess in the last 12 months, a very important consultation process with the UK government about UK CBAM, where they asked industry, companies like ourselves, what do we need from UK CBAM? And we responded to that. And the policy that flowed from that was confirmed last November in the autumn statement. Since then, there's been additional consultation on the primary legislation that will make it law for the UK in 2027. But by and large, we're still waiting for a lot of those details to come through from the UK government.
So time is ticking, really.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, we need to prepare ourselves. We need to fully understand how UK CBAM and our decarbonisation strategy will play together, where we can use that decarbonisation for advantage, because moving to the EAF will bring our carbon footprint down, and that should give us real competitive advantage against imports. But there's a lot of detail we need to still see. There are some important mechanisms related to CBAM around where is the carbon level set for all of our products, relative to which tariffs are imposed. So they're called benchmark values. We need to see those benchmark values. Where those benchmark values aren't available on imports, they will use what's called default values. What are those default values going to be? And last of all, it will involve payment of a tariff. So we need to see the mechanisms around how those tariffs will be paid. And wrapped around all of that is what mechanisms are the UK government going to put in place to ensure there's no circumvention, that it's applied fairly and consistently. All of those things together will allow us to understand where we can best exploit our decarbonisation strategy in the electric arc furnace for best competitive advantage.
So it does sound like we need a little bit more clarity on a few different things.
Oh yeah, we need a lot of clarity, actually. We need a lot more clarity, because we know in principle how it's going to work. We know we can infer from European CBAM how it must work, but the details, we still need them.
I was going to ask you, one final question, if that's okay, Phil. Have you got a message for policymakers and UK government? Is there one resounding message that you want them to take away from this?
Yeah, and it's that UK CBAM has to be part of a holistic UK industrial strategy that addresses costs, it addresses fair carbon cost, but also that it allows UK industry to be competitive in export markets. It has to be part of an industrial strategy whereby we have a robust, growing UK demand that can compete in international spaces. CBAM is part of that, and we need to see all of it come through soon and quickly and comprehensively in the steel strategy and industrial policy.
That's a really clear message. Thank you, Phil. I think it's about creating a level playing field. That's what springs to mind when I think about CBAM. So thank you for your time and hope to catch you later at the
Absolutely.
event.
Have a great show. Thank you.
Procurement, on trade.
Lots of the focus of conversations we've been having here at UK Metals Expo have been about the policy asks of the steel industry in the UK and how government can positively impact the sustainability of the steel industry. Now, one of the biggest areas of policy important to the industry is trade measures and tariffs. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Carrie Bone. Carrie, you're from Kallanish, a trade press. And let's start with the US tariffs on everyone's lips. Where are we with US tariffs in respect to steel?
So the tariffs come in place earlier this year, and following that there was a trade deal announced between the UK and the US that would remove the tariff for UK steel exports. But this hasn't actually been implemented yet, so those exporting to the US are still paying those tariffs.
Yeah.
A sticking point of that is the melt and pour rule.
Right.
That needs to be resolved. The government are working on that, but those who are importing slabs to then roll into finished product will need to find alternative sources that the US administration are happy with, or hope that the government can resolve that issue.
Yeah, so I guess to summarise for those people who aren't up to speed with it, the level of tariffs of UK steel being exported to America is currently, what, 25%?
Yes, it's currently 25%. Some other countries have since been increased to 50%.
Yeah.
So UK is still on 25%, but it was previously agreed it'd be down to zero. So
probably not there yet.
those shipments are still incurring the cost, but those products being sent there tend to be quite niche and specialised. They could include packaging products, oil and gas products. UK exports to the US are 7% in terms of volume, but 9% in terms of value. So they do tend to be the more specialised products that perhaps there isn't domestic supply available currently. But there is a risk that if this goes on for too long, those US buyers will seek to find alternative sources or perhaps start manufacturing domestically. That obviously takes time, but this has gone on for the first half of the year anyway, and we have seen those UK exports to the US dropping in H1.
Yeah, because it's a big piece of business for us in Tata Steel UK. You know, it's a couple of 100,000 tonnes, and it's good value product because, as you described, it's a niche product, and there's a debate about who incurs those costs, whether it's us as a supplier or them as a customer. But of course, it's not just, the trade measures don't just impact our direct exports to the US. There's a thing called trade diversion, isn't there? Could you explain that to people?
Yeah, so these tariffs are on the majority of the countries worldwide now. So those who are wanting to send their steel to the US now can't, but it needs to find a home somewhere. So if the trade measures aren't in place to protect the markets, that trade could be diverted to the UK market or the EU market. And we've seen both of those markets look to step up their tariff quotas to give a bit more support to the domestic market if these imports were to come.
Yeah, it's really difficult because the word protectionism is screaming in the background, isn't it? And where is the UK position compared to the EU in terms of those measures for protecting their domestic markets?
The EU were quick off the mark earlier this year, reducing their tariff allowances. Some were expecting quite extreme measures, but this didn't happen. But they were reduced down. The UK then also revised its tariff quotas also. Jonathan Reynolds, the business secretary at the time, went beyond the TRA recommendations and brought them in sooner, seeking to protect the market.
So this is if those quotas are effectively saying per country or per product, this is the maximum amount you can bring in per year, which should be hopefully less than the domestic demand, allowing the UK producers to still supply that market. Is that right how they work?
Yeah, so the tariff quotas are on a quarterly basis they were set in Q1, Q2, and there's a certain amount per quarter. There used to be a rollover, so if you had stuff left in Q1, it might go into next quarter. The UK has removed that for some product groups as well. So a yearly kind of allowance but split up into quarters, and after that you would then pay a tariff rate on top.
Yeah, and those quotas and tariffs we're talking about are geographically based and product based, but on top of that we've also got this thing called CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. Tell us a bit about how that's happening in Europe and in the UK separately.
Yeah, so for Europe, Their full implementation is coming in 2026. So they have had the reporting period for some time now, but obligations start at the start of 2026, which should shake up the market and perhaps change trade flows, but there's still kind of a lot to be done. There's still a lack of information, a lack of clarity, which is quite frustrating for a lot of people. They just don't know how much they're going to be liable for.
Yeah.
The UK CBAM starts in 2027, so a year later, which some people are also quite unhappy with. But again, the same thing, a lack of clarity on things like default emission values and further understanding, really.
Yeah, it's really difficult in a world like steel, which is a global commodity. If you make one action in one geography, it can impact the other. And the idea that the UK won't have those carbon border protection measures for a year, does that suggest the UK could get flooded with high carbon footprint products that can't get into Europe?
There are definitely fears of that, and that's kind of further compounded by the current safeguard measures in place expire at the end of June next year. According to WTO rules, there's currently a consultation going on about what to replace those measures with, but there is fears of a double whammy in that those tariff rate quotas aren't in place to protect the market, and then high carbon steel is coming into the UK because it can't go to Europe.
Wow, and what's the answer, Carrie? Without putting you on the spot.
What people need is firm and clear information. Everyone needs clarity. Without clarity, you can't have business confidence. And without business confidence, you don't have healthy economies and good markets. I think everyone in the UK and the EU steel markets, they are struggling. And this is a further issue for them to deal with, but they haven't got the resources they need to properly tackle it. So it's making it harder for them, and ultimately what they need is good, clear guidance, and that just isn't there at the moment.
Yeah, and I guess the difficulty with trade measures and protectionism is, where does it all end? It's like a Mexican standoff. If everybody's got it, no one's gonna step down first, are they?
Yeah, that's kind of the point, is there is rising global protectionism. So with China, which is exporting, record volumes of steel, there's anti-dumping cases galore across the world because they are just exporting so much steel. I think last year was 110 million tonnes, if not more, and they're looking on track for 2025 for that number to be even higher. So a huge volume of steel that's going to find a home somewhere, and countries are putting their hands up and saying this is dumping, and we're going to put these measures in place to protect the market. So whilst there's tariff rate quotas, there's also anti-dumping in place too.
Yeah, and I think unlike, we've talked to lots of people about lots of policy areas, we've talked about scrap and energy, and there are opportunities for industry and supply chains to come together, capital investments to solve some of those problems. But with trade measures, I hesitate to say it's all down to the government, isn't it?
The government do obviously play a huge part of it, but the steel market, they have a relationship with the government, they speak with the government, they work very closely with them to say, this is what we need, we can't be competitive unless we're protected. So yes, it is the government, but it should also come from the steel market of this won't work, this will work, because it can't just be, blanket measures, it has to kind of be nuanced and acceptable.
Yeah, but as a steel industry, for example, with the US tariffs, we can't just cut our costs by 25%. It's not that easy. Or work with our customers to say, well, the only solution to that issue is about trade defence measures and negotiating, I guess, government to government.
Yeah, exactly. So those talks with the UK government and Donald Trump do continue. I believe Donald Trump is in the UK next week. Yeah. I'm sure those conversations will again come up, and the government are trying. Yeah, obviously, the trade deal did cover other parts such as the automotive market, which has been resolved. Yeah. So it's just down to those final bits for steel, and that should be a really good move.
Yeah. Listen, Carrie, thanks so much for joining us today. Great to see you again. Hopefully welcome you back to Port Talbot again, see how we get on with the arc furnace. But thanks for the overview of trade measures. It's a massively important topic for us and the whole of the UK industry, and your insight is really, really welcome. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. So we've come across to the supply chain theatre, number 4, where the latest debate has been about navigating trends and price dynamics, which on the surface of it sounds quite dry, but actually that debate got quite lively because quite quickly the discussion went into US tariffs and trade tariffs in the UK. I'm delighted to be joined by one of the protagonists in that debate there. Godfrey Watt, you're president. Participants in that debate. Godfrey, you are president of the ISTA, Firstly, could you explain to our viewers exactly what that body is and who it represents?
Yes, it's quite a broad church. We have about 100 and odd members, and range from steel importers. We've got in it Peel Ports, for example. We've got all the docks, stevedores. We've got processors. We've got marine insurance brokers, credit insurance brokers. In fact, the whole range of what we really call the steel supply chain.
Yeah.
The only bit we don't have, for obvious reasons, are steel producers.
Yeah.
We have agents for steel producers overseas, but of course not domestic ones. Yeah. So we do actually have a very wide perspective of the trade.
The interesting piece I thought about talking to you and trying to get your perspective on the debate was people started talking about the US tariffs that are affecting exports from the UK to America, and the Tata Steel people, they talked about that. There was a discussion about the UK government putting in tariffs to protect the UK big steel companies from cheaper imports and undermining their business. But you put your head above the parapet and you were saying that isn't necessarily the answer for UK PLC.
Correct. Firstly, we should have been making investment in more modern, cost-effective plant years ago. That's not Tata's fault. That's not, should be to some extent because they're owning it.
Yes.
But in the other industries, they haven't done this. Other countries have done this ahead of us, but yet they seem to be called unfair or cheap. Actually, in reality, they can be more competitive. British Steel is a good example where they're vastly overmanned because they run a blast furnace operation. They can be undercut fairly and easily by companies who've invested in modern plant and equipment from day one, from the get-go. They've got a lot of catching up to do, and a lot of pain.
And it is an anathema that people think that companies in Asia, for example, are old plants, cheap labour, and actually the opposite is true.
Correct.
And they are the most modern plants and very competitive.
Yeah.
And there is a difference, obviously, between government subsidised organisations on the other side of the world and those who are just modern, lean and competitive.
Yes, there was a lot made on that. Obviously, Tata, to some extent, is a government subsidised operation here.
Yeah.
Not that that's wrong, but there's no point in bitching about somebody else if you're a recipient yourself.
Yeah.
People in glass houses, and I hope British Steel will also get the investment needed. It's going to cost a lot of jobs because, unfortunately, an EAF doesn't employ the number of people that a blast furnace does.
Yeah, and absolutely, that's the way Tata Steel is going, and it's clearly one of the routes that British Steel could go. And I guess, I'm talking as a dyed-in-the-wool lifer in a big steel company, British Steel, Chorus and Tata Steel, and, I sit here saying it's important that government puts some protection in for a big steel, because if you don't, that business could fail, and if it fails, no one's going to rebuild it. I still have the understanding that there are many, many thousands, tens of thousands of businesses in the UK which use steel who will benefit greatly from cheaper steel coming in to make their own business sustainable. Is that the angle you're coming from?
Partly. You have to strike the balance. Obviously, and we do support a domestic steel industry. I think we should have one. But, for example, we've just got that huge contract to supply boats to Norway. Yeah. Where's the steel going to come from? A re-roller up in the northeast who imports their slab. We've got a plate mill up in Scotland, of course.
A little
but
one.
How are we going to get that back into operation safely, securely for the taxpayer? But we need to, and we should be making steel for making those ships. Yeah. Absolutely. But it all comes back to balance.
It is balance, yes. And of course, those people who are free market economists would say, and you may be in that camp, you say, let the market will dictate, and you will succeed or fail based on whether you can be competitive in your costs and your prices and your technology. But that does leave big industries like steel and maybe cement and glass and coal at risk of competition from other companies and other organisations which are properly, formally subsidised by the government, rather than what we would argue would be some sort of policy framework to support our sustainability.
I can't really comment on other countries and how they do it. Gareth probably knows more because it's his job to know about the. And I'm sure what he gives as information would be, let's say, slanted in a certain direction because that's what he wants to come over as a point.
Yes.
But
But are you a believer in a free market and saying, look, companies in the UK just have to live or die on their own competitiveness?
there's another word I'd add to free, and that's fair.
Yeah.
Because ISTA that's fundamentally, we believe in free trade but fair trade.
Yeah.
Fair trade does not compass dumping in any shape or form, but we have protection measures against dumping, of course,
Yeah.
which we will continue, I'm sure, and should do. But when you don't get a government that listens properly to its own appointed trade remedies authority and changes it, those guys have spent months analysing data and bringing in reports and and then they get overruled by somebody who just said, no, we're going to do that.
Yeah.
And that damaged a lot of people. We hear 10 or 11 million quid's worth just on the galvanised imports. It's very well for Gareth to say, well, people could be fleet of foot. You can't be fleet of foot for 6 days when you've got your steel either there or on the water.
Yeah.
You can't argue that you even saw it coming because you didn't. That happened completely out of line with what the TRA were talking about and what we saw their draft proposal. He did that completely out of line. So no way, you can't be fleet of foot on that. But why do you try and protect one industry by seriously damaging another sector? That is criminal.
But you're saying what sector would you say the government is damaging by rejecting the TRA report?
Everybody who was contracted, for example, on that galvanised, that was going into people's businesses. So suddenly there's 25% duty hit. Somebody's got to pay it.
Yeah, that's
The HMRC get the revenue, great.
it's
But
really-
these are all private businesses.
Yeah.
And how can you actually just attack them like that?
But that comes back to the first point we were discussing, doesn't it? About saying you've got big businesses like steel, which require billions of pounds to invest in them if you were going to, and if they close, you're never going to start them up again.
True.
Or you've got small businesses, who are trying to be competitive based on price, but if you shut them down, you can probably start one up again tomorrow. So, what is it your members are looking for from the government?
Good question. We're a fairly broad church, so difficult to say what all of them. I'd say the predominant feeling is, well, when are we going to get some certainty, and is our voice going to be heard? And our voice will be saying to the government, look, we want a fair, when you talk about a level playing field, that's exactly what we want. But that doesn't mean a playing field that's slanted that way towards producers. Equally, all I want them to do is take into account the whole steel sector. And that's much, much, much bigger than just the UK steel producers' employees.
Yeah. I think on that note, we're going to leave it. Godfrey, listen, thanks ever so much for taking time out with us.
problem.
It's been a pleasure to listen to you today, and all the best with your battles with the UK government, as we have as well. But listen, thanks very much
Everybody.
indeed.
Yeah,
Much
all right.
appreciated.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.